first questions that the audience wants to know, what inspired you to become a professor of Spanish linguistics, and what do you enjoy most about your work?
Okay, thank you. So I grew up in Ghana, which is in West Africa. And from a very young age, I was very used to hearing different languages because Ghana is surrounded by French countries. So when I got to college, that was when I took my first Spanish class. And I was very fascinated with getting to learn Spanish because I was used to learning French. And the more I studied Spanish, the more that I realized certain things about Spanish, about language in general, about how language connects with power, with identity and representation. And I remember one of my professors called Dr. Lamte, he's in Ghana. He pushed me to continue to study Spanish and get into higher education. And what I love most about my job as a professor is the fact that I get to talk about language issues and about how topics like who gets left out of the conversation, who has a voice, and how important language is. And I also like working with students, especially those students who feel like their voices or their backgrounds are not represented in the language curriculum. So that's what I like the most about my job.
Nice. What role do you think language plays in preserving and promoting cultural identity, particularly to Afro-Latino communities?
I would say that language plays a very, very important role in keeping culture alive, especially for Afro-Latinx communities. And I would say that this is important because for Afro-Latinx communities, language is a way to tell stories. It's a way to share traditions. It's a way to stay connected with one's roots. And language is a way that allows Afro-Latinx communities to pass down music, pass down oral traditions and stories and memories that would otherwise have been forgotten or would have been lost. And so that's why many Afro-Latinx communities are fighting to keep their languages alive. Languages like Papiamento, languages like Garifuna and Palenquero, because language is a way to push back against society and a way to push back against being erased and to say, no, I am here and my story really matters in society.
Love it, love it. How do you encourage your students to engage critically with materials and think about the language beyond just grammar and vocabulary?
That's a great question. I always try to create a classroom where students see language as something that is really connected to their identity, power, and culture, and not just something that they have to memorize and try and see how they will learn the endings of AIIR verbs. So instead of just focusing on the grammar drills and vocabulary lists, I like to bring in real world examples like music and social media posts and news clips and interviews because I want my students to see how language is used in different places and communities. I want them to see how languages, who gets represented and whose voices is missing in society. And what does this tell about our society? And so I like to use reflection activities. I like students to write about their own experiences with language because sometimes you have students in the class who have been told that maybe you don't sound Latino, or maybe you have to change the way you speak so that you can fit in, or maybe you have a Spanish sounding name, so you should speak Spanish. Students come to the class with all these preconceptions about what they should know, what they should do. So bringing all that to the class helps them to connect and how to connect language with their own lives. And it opens up this space for an honest conversation. Another thing that I like to do is to give them a choice with projects. I help them to focus on topics that they care about. Sometimes some students will choose to work on maybe language in reggaeton, bilingualism at home, whatever really speaks to them. Because when students feel like their stories matter, then they become naturally invested and more thoughtful. So recently we did a song analysis project. Students had to choose their own songs of their choice sung in Spanish. And they had to analyze like the vocabulary, the verb tenses, the cultural context, and how language reflected their cultural background. and then why the artists chose these themes and explored in the songs. So they really enjoy this activity because they chose the Spanish songs themselves. And I encourage them to ask big questions, to connect language to their own lives, and then to challenge what they have been taught in society. And then by doing this, they move beyond like the textbooks and then they start to think critically. And I
Right.
think it's important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can you share an example how your research has impacted or influenced your teaching approach?
Absolutely, yes. So one clear example from my research with Afro-Latinx representation in textbooks is that I found that Afro-Latinx communities are always either completely missing or shown in very stereotypical ways, you know. So it pushed me to start thinking about the materials that I myself was using in my classrooms. And I decided that it's time to create my own classroom models that center Afro-Latinx voices and histories and cultural contributions. So what I did was I started to bring in interviews, music, and literature that were created by Afro-Latinx individuals themselves. And by doing this, I didn't want to just add diversity, but the goal was to shift the entire conversation. And I didn't want to just talk about Afro-Latinx, but in my classes, I teach using the literature of Afro-Latinx individuals, using their work as like the foundation for my classes. And this really shifted the way I teach my classes. This makes students think critically, it makes them reflect. So at the end of the day, the research that I do, it doesn't just sit in a journal waiting for educators to read. It actually lives in the classroom because it shapes the way I design my syllabi. It shapes the way I choose the text. It makes me connect with my students because I use materials written by Afro-Latinx individuals themselves. And it allows students who typically would not see themselves in the Spanish classroom. It helps them to really connect with the Spanish class.
Okay, so what do you see as the most important contribution of Afro-Latina voices in the field of linguistic and cultural studies?
Yeah, this is a great question. I would say that Afro-Latina voices have made very, very powerful and necessary contributions to both linguistics and cultural studies, especially the fact that they have challenged this idea that there's only one way to speak Spanish or there's only one way to be Latinx. And this is important because it has really challenged this long-standing erasure and the way Afro-Latinas have been silenced in society, you know. In linguistics, for example, several Afro-Latina scholars, they have expanded the understanding of Spanish varieties because they have been able to document Afro-descendant communities, the way they speak, whether it's Afro-Caribbean Spanish, whether it's Spanish in the US, or African influenced Spanish, you know. And also in cultural studies, we have Afro-Latina voices who have been able to highlight how Blackness intersects with various social constructs. They have helped to reframe what it means to be Afro-Latina. They have opened up spaces for conversations on identity, belonging, beauty standards, you know, language discrimination, amongst many others. So I'll say Afro-Latinas have really, really made important contributions to the field of both linguistics and cultural studies.
Absolutely. How can educators add more lessons and topics about Afro-Latina culture to the curriculum to increase representation and awareness in the classroom?
I would say it should start with real stories, you know, include voices and the lived experience of Afro-Latinas and Afro-Latinx in your classroom. Real stories, not hypothetical stories, you know. Assign readings, interviews, explore documentaries, things that highlight their contributions to music, to literature, activism, politics, and daily life. No, there's so much that can be included. Writers like Yolanda Arroyo Pizarro, Elizabeth Acevedo. There's so much powerful writings that can be used as starting points. It's good to look through your textbooks and teaching materials. Make sure the texts are as inclusive as possible. You can use short poems, short stories, musical lyrics. Students really connect with music. And so there's so many Afro-Latina artists and creators whose music students can resonate with. I would also say it's good to encourage reflections, have students speak out about their own identities and experiences. Ask them, like, have you ever felt you had to choose between parts of who you are? These kind of reflections, they create empathy and they allow students to make connections between their lives and those of others. And by having these reflections, it helps them to identify with marginalized groups such as Afro-Latinx and other marginalized groups in general. And these are ways to really spark these conversations. And above all, I would say it's important that educators are intentional, intentional with creating representation for Afro-Latinx, because you wouldn't see this in the typical textbook materials that you use. But putting this in consciously, that I'm going to create representation for Afro-Latinx communities, whether it's in the grammar materials that you use, whether it is in music, whether it is in literature, anything, just intentionally bringing this representation to the forefront. I think it's a good way to start.
Dr. Padilla, if anyone wants to reach out to you, what are your handles on social media?
On Facebook, I am just Lillie Padilla.
Okay, on Facebook. What about Instagram?
On Instagram, so I think I'm just the same.
Okay, just the same. Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. If anyone wants to reach out to Dr. Padilla, please reach out to her on Facebook or Instagram. She also want to let everybody know that she is our new sponsor. So thank you again, Ms. Padilla, Dr. Padilla, for being our sponsor for AfroLatina World. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. See you next time at AfroLatina World. Bye.
Yes, bye.